I need to totally expand my horizons because I didn't know hijacking airplanes was so predominant. After this movie, I did some research and I'm like, holy moly, this was a huge political slash terrorism gain back in the day. Chase Lee Hockey here with the Blue Futon reviewing Hijack 1971. So what is about pretty simple premises based on a true event where there was a hijacking from a plane trying to go from South Korea to North Korea. And in the meantime, there are some deaths and there was an emergency landing on a beach. And what happened in between, taking off and, landing on the beach, that's where the fiction, the Hollywood, the South Korean Hollywood style comes into play. So did I like this film? I thought it was okay. I thought the story itself was tense and what we're trying to get from these different characters and what they're trying to get to on the plane. But there were some character choices where I was like, come on, would that really happen? As well as some director choices where if you're trying to make a serious film, there are some elements to this movie that I don't know should have been added to it. So when we talk about the positives, I think this movie does shed a light to probably South Koreans, to Americans, to anyone watching this film to, maybe research the past of what has occurred because, some of the famous hijackings for America, 9/11, some probably for other countries, could have been this one, could have been the Israel one, and things like that. Like there's plenty of hijackings that you actually see across the world that is more relevant to that region for what actually has occurred. So I do think having that is very good overall. The acting, I thought it was pretty good with the hijacker, the pilots, the passengers. I think they played their parts pretty well and what they had to do to get from point A to point B to point C. So I think they did really good there. The CGI, that's where it starts to falter a little bit because it starts off with one plane going into from South Korea to North Korea, and one of the pilots knowing one of the other pilots in the commercial airline saying that's a colonel reservist in the Air Force, and they didn't shoot it down because of all the passengers on the plane. Because it was a weird time where do you shoot down the plane and kill the passengers? Do you shoot down and hopefully the pilot can land the plane safely? Or do you get the people that went to North Korea back to South Korea? However, when they come back to South Korea, there's going to be a lot of angst with a lot of South Koreans saying they're defectors, they're commies, and there's things like that. So at a point, they're like, ooh, do we even want to? Because that was a good plot point for one of the pastors saying, I don't know if we should go after the terrorists. But one guy's like, look, I have a neighbor that kind of, I want to say deflected, but they were accusing him of being a spy because of this North Korea, South Korea, regional chaos going on during this time. So it's like, nah, I would rather take him down and at least try to save the people on board. And of course, there are some people that are like, no, don't do it. You're like, no, you got to do it. You got to realize, at a point, I think there is naivety. Some people be like, oh, we'll be okay. They don't really want to hurt you. Bro, they brought bombs on a plane. They brought knives on a plane. They're shooting people. What? Why don't you think they want to kill you? And I do think there's levels of that, I think, overall with people's mindset of oh, no, we'll be okay. Nah, you got to think the worst because some people want to watch the world burn. Like California, people with blowtorches were starting the fires. So it's like people want to watch the world burn. And okay, I know it's a little bit different, but it's the same way where there are bad people and they want to see carnage. So I think that was an interesting effect. But going back to the CGI now, there are some, that it just didn't look good. Like at the very beginning when they're doing some training exercises, didn't look good. Some things at the end didn't look good. There were some things in the middle where there were some good emergency landing scenes where I'm like, okay, that doesn't look bad, but you can tell the budget was on the lower side to do some of these special effects. And things that actually occur. Okay, there's something happens at the very end where it's like this commercial airline. There's multiple things in this commercial airline that would not have happened, especially with the bomb going off in the very beginning and how the plane was turning. Nah, fam, that plane would have been dead. Sorry. Everyone would have been dead. Also, something that's at the very end where they're doing this huge, turn at the border. Sorry, wouldn't happen with that plane. I know for a fact if real-life pilots saw this movie, they would almost, gag of, how unrealistic some of the scenarios in this movie are. And then when looking at some of the, like I said, some character slash director choices, there was one when the first bomb went off and he wanted to do a slow motion from the back of the plane to the front of the plane. And it looked a little bit too cartoony with what some of the characters were doing and the overall impact of the movie. Because if a terrorist is putting a bomb on a plane and is putting a hole in the plane, it shouldn't be a slow motion, oh shit moment, because it's kind of based on a true event, if you want to put it that way. So treat it like a true event and try not to Hollywoodize it or South Korean Hollywoodize it for your own personal gain, because it really did take me out of the movie where I was like, oh, I didn't like that. Didn't like that at all. But I do think there was some good heroics in this movie that does portray of like what people would do. Like hate to say, like, you see that Captain America scene, something happens here, as well as, you see it in other movies where people try to protect themselves from other bombs and things like that. So overall, though, I think Hijack 1971 does a good job, like maybe telling people, hey, you might want to read history a little bit of what has occurred in the past for when dealing with hijackings and how it was a crazy event that occurred over and over and over again. And it's also a fun thing to watch for some people who've never been on a plane before, and how people were able to get on the plane, where it's more like first come, first serve. You have a ticket, but are you going to be in the front of the plane or back of the plane? And there's no assigned seating, kind of like Southwest. But they are changing that in 2025. But overall, like I said, my second overall, Hijack 1971. It's a good film. I think, like I said, good history lesson to look at the past. However, there are some glaring directorial writing flaws with how the planes move, with some of the CGI, and some of the choices of like, this is supposed to be a serious event. Let's try to make it a little bit more serious in some of these actions. So Hijack 1971 will receive a 3 out of 5 Futons, which equals at 60%. Let's see what the critics' news scores gave this one. So we have critics, there's 5 of them, audience scoring 88 with over 50. So for the critics, we have a negative, a positive, positive, positive. So that is an 80. My 60 in the positives are a 4 out of 5, a 3.5 out of 5, a 3 out of 5, and just something that says viewers can expect octane action. But it also says at the very end, this fact that it's based on a true story makes it more interesting. The true story was a hijacking, not all the shenanigans happening in the sky with all the planes turning and things like that. Anyway, so we'll go with that 80%, 88, my 60. Chae Scott here at the Blue Futon. Like, comment, subscribe. Want to know things Futontopia? You Blue Futonians. Thank you for watching. Have a great night. Watch us take tomorrow week for a month. I need to find every single one of you. It's early in the morning. Really early.